If you enjoyed the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. Nate, when did you become interested in aviation?
It started relatively young for me. I got the bug in third grade, is what my parents tell me. Third grade, I decided I wanted to be a pilot. I think that comes from my grandfather. He was a flight engineer on B-29s back in World War II. So, yeah, started pretty young. I remember seeing the Blue Angels as a kid and really enjoying that, and kind of lit the fire, which stuck with me all the way through college, and then decided to make a career out of it after that. That is a good question. So kind of to back up a little, I knew I wanted to fly. I went to college to get a business degree. My parents had a great recommendation. They said, hey, you've said you wanted to fly since you were a kid, but you never really have. Let's not jump too deep into that hole before actually getting, actually enjoying it or trying it a little bit. So I got a business degree, and while I was in school, I got my private pilot license. So I had a little taste of it, really enjoyed it. Got an internship, corporate internship, project managing when I was in college, and it made an easy decision post-college that I was gonna go the aviation route. Business wasn't for me, sitting in the cubicle wasn't gonna work, and I wanted to fly. Coming out of there though, there was no one in my family who had flown before other than my grandfather as a flight engineer, back in the 40s. So I didn't really know the paths too well. I knew there was a civilian path. I knew there was a military path. I didn't know which one was for me, and I didn't have a lot of input from outside sources on which one to do or, consider. So the one connection I had was a family friend who was part owner of a flight school out in Georgia. So I ended up going out there and just kind of took the path in front of me and went the civilian way. I spent about a year out in Georgia, got my instrument through CFI, and then moved back to California. I grew up in California, so moved back to California. This time was living in Southern California. Got a flight instructing job out there in Long Beach. And as I started doing that job and meeting more people in the industry and, getting some clients who had been airline guys and some clients who had been military, one especially at the time was a former F-18 Marine pilot who was a client, and started talking to him about the different routes and seeing the aviation industry from a few different perspectives. That's when I started getting way more interested in the military side. And so I started kind of pushing that direction and looking into, how do I make this happen? What are the options? I've heard rumors of Guard and Reserve, but didn't know much about it, but started pushing into the active duty side. I went to a recruiter in my mid-20s and said, hey, I'm flight instructing now. I've got my civilian ratings. I want to fly for you guys. What do I have to do? And I was just told, you're too old. We can't make this work.
Really?
Sorry. Yeah, that was it. It's maybe a 5-minute conversation. Yeah, it was a bummer, trying to figure out the aviation industry and figure out what I wanted to do. And I finally thought, I was like, yep, this is it. This sounds amazing. And I had a buddy who was in the Air Force as well. He was flying F-16s, and he loved it. And so finally thought I figured it out, and then the door closed real fast, just right in my face. Too old, this won't work. And I was like, man, okay. So started looking into other routes. I was talking to the Marines. The former F-18 pilot was helping out there. They have a path where if you can qualify and get selected, they'll guarantee a pilot spot for you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, quite a competitive spot, I hear. I was working hard to get that ball rolling, and I was just running into roadblocks there too. It was a lot of paperwork, a lot of stuff I needed from other people, recommendations and all that I had to get submitted to the recruiter. And so I was getting all that done. I'd send them all the stuff, and then This was back in, gosh, what was this, 2010 or 11. So there was stuff getting faxed in. It was still still a little older in the way we got stuff done. But I'd show up to meetings at the recruiting office and they'd be like, hey, we have none of your paperwork. What are you doing? And I'd be like, no, I swear, I know I sent you everything. And then, 20 minutes later, oh, we found it. Okay. So we can continue. And then, I get a phone call that, hey, you got to be at a medical tomorrow morning, 5 a.m., or we're dead in the water. We just got word that it's tomorrow or they're cutting off all pilot packages. And so I got that voicemail while I'm at work, and now I'm scrambling. I take the next morning off. I'm calling him after work. Hey, where do I need to be? I'll be there. Just tell me. And I got no information. So I'm up at 3 something in the morning, drive out to LA. It's a 45-minute drive. There's no traffic, thankfully. But cruise out there, at least go to the recruiter's office so I'm ready as soon as I know that, this is the address. I can get there. We can get it done. We can make it happen. And doors were closed. Lights were off. Never heard anything until 9:30 that morning. He said, hey, don't worry about it. We'll reschedule another time. And I was like, what are we doing? Like, I'm really trying, man. And they are making this difficult. So I'd been fighting through that. I'd kind of heard about the Garden Reserve and was looking into, is this possible and how does it work? And there was a squadron down in Southern California, gave them a call, flying C-130s. Gave them a call, said, hey, I'd love to fly for you guys. And they basically said, hey, there's a lot of demand for pilot spots in Southern California flying C-130s. And they do C-130, it's a C-130 guard unit. They do fire support too, I believe. So it was a quick conversation there of like, hey, if you want to fly with us, you got to enlist, and it's going to take a couple years before we give you the spot, and another year to get to pilot training. And I was like, man, I'm running out of time. I'm getting a little old. Active duty already told me I was too old in my mid-20s. So started talking to another recruiter, and he just said, hey, email me your resume and I'll send it to the squadrons out here. And I was like, I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but that doesn't sound like that's going to get the job done.
Yeah.
So I emailed him a civilian resume, and long story short, I didn't get any calls back because I hadn't taken any, the TBAS or the AFOQT or any of the tests. So I didn't have the package put together. So went the civilian route because that was the route in front of me. Decided Air Force sounded like a good option and the way I wanted to go, but hit a ton of roadblocks to start there. And at the same time, while I was dealing with all that, I got hired by a regional airline. And so I just said, all right, I'm going to go that route. We're going to keep this going the civilian way. So I got picked up by the regional, started that job based out in Chicago. And then that's where I started meeting more people in the Garden Reserve. So kind of sum it up, hopefully get a picture that kind of went down that road and then decided Air Force was the way, and took a while to get there. Is that all track so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so when you went regional, what were you on the 7.3s?
No, the regional airline, it was like the 50 seaters. So
Oh,
it was
okay.
American Eagle at the time that I got hired by, and I got on the Embraer 145 out of training. So it was, we flew the Embraer 135, 140, and 145. So around 40 to 50 seats, give or take a little, depending on the model. So I was flying those, and that's when I started meeting a lot of different people in the Garden Reserve. These guys who had either done active duty or just gone straight to the Guard Reserve, and were now splitting time, doing the traditional reserve training, splitting time, maybe 3/4 airline, 1/4 Air Force. And so that got the ball rolling again. I started talking to these guys and say, hey, you can do it. It's still possible. So started looking into it again, figured out everything I had to do. So this time I knew I got to get these tests done, the AFOQT, I got to get the TBAS, I got to put together a package. And I started calling around, finding a good recruiter. That was finally the key that unlocked everything. I found a great recruiter out in Wright Pat in Dayton, Ohio. And this guy was awesome. He would go above and beyond to make sure that if I was going to do my work, he was going to do his work, and we were going to make it happen. So that took a huge weight off my shoulders. But long story short, well, I'll back up a little. At this point, I was getting toward my late 20s. I think I might have been 28. And the cutoff for pilot training at the time was 30. So you had to be in pilot training by your 30th birthday or you needed an age waiver. And so now the idea was like, I really want to do this. I don't know if I have the time, but I'm going to take it one step at a time. And if it works, we'll take the next step. And if that works, I'll take the next step and I'll just keep the ball rolling and we'll see if I can make this happen. And so step one was finding that good recruiter. And that was a huge help. He walked me through the process. We set up the test, the AFOQT. That went well. And he was like, yeah, your scores are competitive. Let's do the TBAS. And if anyone's unfamiliar, the AFOQT is kind of the general test anyone has to take to become an officer in the Air Force. And it's kind of like the SATs out here, or just a overall test of general knowledge areas. And then it also has a pilot section and Air Force specific stuff in there that kind of relate to the Air Force jobs. And then based on how you score on each of the different sections, they give you a cumulative score for like the pilot job or navigators or, different portions of different types of Air Force jobs. So that went well. Was had a competitive score on that. Went to the TBAS, and I cannot remember what that stands for, but it's basically a pilot specific test to take you through coordination exercises, orientation, all on a computer screen. I think the first one kind of oriented you. The idea was you were looking at a drone flying or an aircraft flying over the ground, and it might be going south or east, whatever direction. And it says, based on the perspective of the aircraft, what's on, looking at this quadrant of 4 squares, which one's the northeast one? So you kind of had to orient yourself. If I'm facing south, and the northeast one's going to be behind me. And then you got to pick it, and it times you. So it's looking for accuracy and quickness. And then you had to do another module where you've got a joystick and rudder pedals and a button. And man, I want to say I think a button or two. It's been a while since I've taken this, so it might be close instead of perfectly accurate. But this one got me sweating. It was, first you just got to track a moving target on the screen. And so you're just following with the joystick. And then you got to track one moving side to side across the bottom of the screen with the rudders. And then you got to do those two together. So you're tracking one with the rudders and one with the stick.
It's like that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Pat your head and rub your stomach. And then you got headphones on, and they started, they gave you a few numbers or letters to remember. And they said, whenever you hear number 3, 6, and 7, click the joystick. So you're rubbing your head, patting your head and trying to click. And man, you're starting to sweat. Like, this should be not this difficult. Yeah. And so it's tracking how accurate you are and keeping an eye on those things and keeping the target on the moving target. And man, it was work. I just remember coming out of that being like, I hope that went well, because that was a lot of work. It went well enough. The scores were competitive again. And also having the score also incorporates prior flying. So if you've got, I don't remember the hour breakdowns, but say 0 to 50 hours, you get a few extra points on your score. 50 to 100, you get some extra points. 100 to 200, and on and on. I don't remember what the cap was, but I had my CFI. I had instructed for a few years. I had regional airline experience, so I maxed out the extra points. So it's competitive there too. So now the ball's moving. I've done the 2 big steps, and he's like, hey, listen, you're competitive. I think we can make this happen. And we're getting into a spot where it's, that would have been about a year and a half. I think it was probably 28 and a half. I was getting this done. And he's like, all right, let's put together a package, take those scores, your college transcripts, cover letter, letters of recommendation, all that, put it together, and we're going to submit it to the squadrons you want to fly for. And so it was a really interesting process. Active duty is very much you apply to the Air Force. If you're selected to become a pilot, you just get on the pilot track. And then you go through pilot training, you go through, you get racked and stacked, you pick your route based on that of fighter bomber, heavy tanker helicopters. You go that route, you get racked and stacked. You put your dream sheet out for what you want to fly where based on what the Air Force has available at the time. And then you're told, hey, this is where you're going. Whereas for the Guard Reserve, you only apply to the squadrons you're looking to fly for. So it was a very different mentality, and it gives you a lot more control. So being kind of short on time, I applied to a handful of squadrons pretty quickly. Got the interviews going. The good news was the interviews were going. The bad news was I had just kind of missed, or at the tail end of the interview window. Because every year, at the time I was applying, the Air Force Board would meet twice a year. And the Air Force Board would take all the applicants from all the Reserve and Guard squadrons and either approve or deny them. So there were 6-month kind of gaps between interview windows. And so I was at the end of, it was in the winter. So I was kind of getting to the end of the reserve or the interview window that would, for the board that would meet in the summer in June. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So a lot of squadrons had already done their interviews, picked their guys. And so when I sent out the applications, a few just said, hey, we're already done, sorry. And I had developed a good relationship with one of those squadrons, which was McGuire C-17s out on the East Coast. And their hiring guy was just super helpful, always willing to provide advice. Even though they had already hired their guys, he was kind of like a mentor to me. Awesome guy. And so I would talk to him every once in a while and just kind of give him a rundown of where I was, and he'd give me some advice. But to sum it up, I interviewed down in Wright Pat. The plan was to go there, got picked up, and then the sequesters all came through and I lost my spot. Funding cuts, didn't have a spot. And so now we're past the end of the interview window. I am pretty much out of options in that sense. So I'm scrambling, and I've just started calling and emailing everyone I had talked to on the way up to this point. So any squadron I had talked to, anything, sent out the emails, got back in touch with McGuire and the guy who'd been a mentor and just explained the situation to him. And he was like, listen, as luck would have it, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, of the 2 guys we were going to pick up, we lost one like this week. So we have an open spot. Now, the interview window's closed, but we've been talking a lot and I kind of know you. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but if I can work an interview for you this weekend, they had their UTA, their 1 weekend a month drill weekend, the following weekend, and whatever it was, if that was a Monday, in 5 days. So he's like, listen, let me talk to the leadership. If I can work you an interview, we'll get you out here. We'll give you an interview. No guarantees, but we'll see what can happen here. And again, I had one other squadron was awesome and did that as well. So I flew out on a Thursday night. I flew to the West Coast to interview Travis. They were flying C-5s. So interviewed there Friday morning, ran back to the airport, jumped on a plane, flew to the East Coast for a Saturday morning interview, and ended up having my choice of positions, whether I wanted to be East or West Coast based, and decided the East Coast, was the place for me. So quite a process, but ended up getting the spot kind of right down, we were getting right down to cutoff point of we're going to run out of time. Thankfully, I already had my medical scheduled with the initial spot I got. So I had a medical date at Wright Pat. And if anyone's not familiar, it's quite a process. It's a 2-day medical where they're doing every test they can think of, a lot of eye tests. And scheduling those can be a bit difficult. So what was great was we were just able to hold on to that, keep that spot, and not delay that, which allowed me to transition over to McGuire, keep my medical, get the package fully submitted for the board in June, and then get selected there. So it's quite a process going down the civilian route, figuring out the Air Force was the way I wanted to go, hitting a bunch of brick walls, continuing the civilian, meeting some new people, finding a good recruiter, and just rolling with each test and taking it one step at a time to see, it's like, hey, can we make this happen?
Yeah, so let's talk about the C-17 because I've got a couple of questions about it. So, yeah, what was it like to fly? What was what was the training like, and what were the similarities and differences coming from the kind of civilian world?
Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of, the basics. The foundation is basically the same. Airplanes up, down, left, right is basically the same. So that helped a lot, especially going through the initial training,
Yeah,
the UPT undergraduate pilot training. That gave me a good foundation, a big head start there to where I could spend my time more getting used to the Air Force style of flying. And
yeah,
that was the big difference is a lot of different rules and regulations. And even, the traffic pattern was different. You go from civilian general aviation, just a rectangle pattern, to the Air Force flying the T6 turboprop, and it's a lot faster and there's a lot more activity. And you've got the rectangle with the overhead, oval pattern in the inside. So it's even stuff like that, just learning different procedures, processes, ways of doing things. And then building on that was different types of flying. So prior to the Air Force, my aerobatic experience was 2 flights in a Pitts S2B, which were the coolest flight I had had up to that point. I did my spin training in that, and then he was like, "All right, now we're going to do aerobatics. We're going to learn some stuff there." And upside down loops and rolls and everything as like a little kid in a candy store. Man, I was having the
yeah,
time of my life. And so then going to the Air Force and, in that UPT, you're actually flying aerobatics and all, and then formation. And so a lot of new stuff to figure out. And formation is not something you ever really do in the civilian side. So anyway, to get back to your question on the C-17, the civilian flying definitely set the foundation. Transitioning to UPT kind of broke some, I guess, habits and, ways of doing things that I had learned. And so got me in that Air Force mindset. And then from there, we went out to Altus. And this is where the training was a bit different because I'd been through the jet training with the Embraer 145. And, on the commercial side, it's a business. They're here to make money. So it's pretty compact. And they expect you to do a lot on your own
mhm,
and really come prepared to every lesson. Not that the Air Force doesn't. It's just a different mentality. So it was much more concise, quicker footprint, shorter training. And at the same time, there's less to train on just based on the mission, for lack of a better word. An airline, you're flying A to B. If you can fly the plane between those 2 points and handle the emergencies innate to the aircraft and, the environment, you're good. Whereas the Air Force has an entirely different mission where, you're air refueling, you're flying low levels, you're other threats that wouldn't necessarily affect a general aviation aircraft. So it brings in a lot more. But the concise, faster paced airline training was a bit more slowed down at the Air Force. So going out to the C-17, we had, I believe it was about 30 sim sessions, give or take a bit. I don't remember the number exactly, but a number of sim sessions where they took you a bit slower than the airline did, and understandably slow because these guys are just coming out of, UPT straight into a heavy jet that does a lot of stuff and goes fast. Versus the airlines, you got these guys have 1,500 hours of time before they're touching a much smaller, easier to handle jet. So about 30 sims and then 3 flights is it. 2 flights in the C-17 and then a check ride. So it's relatively concise in that sense, in the flying the aircraft sense. But yeah, you get a taste of everything on the Air Force side. We did, vividly remember the first low levels. You're flying 300 feet, 310, 20 knots, and they turn and you're like, I think the wing's going to hit those trees, or like I can see the guy in the tractor's face down there. Like
yeah,
it's wild to be that low in a plane going that fast and that big
mhm,
and that maneuverable. So definitely different mentalities between the training, but having that airline training where, they're focused on money and go, go, go and get what you need done, definitely prepared me to be ready and prep for the C-17 side and more or less know what was coming. Having having some jet time, I had a little more experience than the guys who were, just coming out of the T1. So it was definitely helpful, but still habits to break, things to learn, procedures, whole different mentality, a whole different structure of books and studying and everything. But yeah, definitely helped prepare for it.
So, what would you say are the strengths and weaknesses of the Globemaster, or do you guys call it the Moose? I never know which one to call it.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Right.
I tended to hear the term moose more often when I was deployed, but yep, moose or the Globemaster, just C-17. Um, it is a hell of an aircraft. I remember in training too, in the sim training for the C-17 in Oklahoma, one of the sim instructors, his his saying was, "It's man, this jet's like Nike. Just do it. Like whatever you want, it'll just do it."
Mhm.
And it is a very capable, very very capable jet, especially for its size. Strengths, and for a jet that big, it is very maneuverable. You got the center stick, so you can really yank and bank a bit, and it's in 45, 60 degrees. As long as you're not, when you start getting really heavy, if you're not too fast, it won't be too happy if you yank over to 60 degrees, but very maneuverable, uh, powerful. It's got four of the 757 engines on it, for comparison to the civilian world, and very capable in the way of getting into short fields getting to different places. It can take off on very short fields. It can land on very short. 3,500 feet was our min on in the books. But, oftentimes when we're doing the training, we're at training weights, so it's light. You don't have a heavy load in the back. You're not super loaded up on gas. So, and 3,500 feet was no problem. You could stop that thing so fast. And the brakes on it are incredible. I mean, 2,000, you could be stopped in 2,000 feet often, easy. And then having the ability to back up, you can open a door, put the reversers, throw the engines in reverse and start backing up. And the load master will just talk you back. And hey, turn toward engine one, turn toward engine four, and keep coming back. And you can back up, you can turn, kind of star turn, they call it. And just very maneuverable, very capable, low and fast, relatively fast, for its size. But 300 feet, 330 knots or so, ripping around on the ground, made it a lot of fun. Weaknesses, I'd say its size were the weaknesses. It is not an easy aircraft to hide. So if
No.
you're trying to avoid radar detection, you got to be behind something or be using a very good strategy because it's not going to hide. It's a big, bulky aircraft, and it is, yeah, there's not enough chaff in the world to hide that thing. So we don't carry that. But so in that sense, yeah, hard to hide. You got to stay low, get behind something more or less. And then additionally, it's big and bulky. So if you want to go fast, it takes a lot of gas. So on the long haul flights, when we're going over to Europe or, over to, spent a lot of time in Germany near London, Spain, you're going that way, you're crossing the ocean. You're not going very fast, maybe Mach 7.6, 7.4, decimal 7.6, 7.4, which you're just watching airliners above you just cruise by you. And especially 747s, man. If you see one of those, it feels like standing still the way that thing's flying by.
Hmm.
So it's a bit slow on the long haul stuff. And if you want to get up to, 7, 8, or the higher speeds closer to what the airlines fly, it just uses excessive amounts of gas. So it really limits your range, or limits what you can carry, or it's just very expensive. But otherwise, man, it's super capable. It's a lot of fun to fly. Air refueling was a lot of fun as well. So it can stay up for as long as they need.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of strengths, few weaknesses in that just not that fast when you're going a long way,
Yeah.
and definitely a big girl.
But you mentioned there you got deployed. Can you tell us what this was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did month and a half deployment out to the Middle East. The C-17, this was back in 2017. So the C-17 was based and still is as far as I know, we had bases in Kuwait and Al Udeid. And so I was out in Al Udeid Spent 6 weeks there. Very different type of flying. Stateside, flying out of McGuire, we are still picking up missions and so when I got on with the Air Force, I was employed at the regional airline. So I went on military leave, took 5 years of mil leave. That took me through all the training and then through kind of our spin up process where you come back and you're on orders and you get trained by the squadron in the real world mission stuff. And you did the schoolhouse stuff, you learned the basics, but this is how it works in the real world, which is always different. Same for the airlines too. You learn the schoolhouse stuff and then most of it translates over, but in the real world, things are a little different. So did that. Once the training was done, you start picking up missions and training to fill your schedule. So I did 5 years total before I went back to the airline, of 2 years or so of training and then 3 years of flying missions and this deployment and other stuff. So stateside, when you're flying these missions, same idea. We're still moving the same stuff. We're just starting stateside, going over to Europe, whether London, Germany, Spain, and then maybe drop some cargo, pick up some cargo, and then go down to Africa into the Middle East, and then back through Europe, and then back to the States. So generally, you're doing one long haul leg on the front and back end. You're getting 24 hours off somewhere in Europe, and then you're doing out and back more or less, for the most part, into Africa and then back, or the Middle East and back, or wherever they need, wherever the mission goes. That was kind of the bread and butter. There are a lot of missions went the other way too, east, west, north, south, go every direction. But our primary stuff was that direction. So you're very used to that kind of 3-day missions at least, if not 5 or 7, and then coming back home with a long leg. But here, being based in the Middle East where everything's going on, everything was out and backs. So all the flying we would do was, a leg into Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, all over the Middle East, and then back. And so you're kind of home, for lack of a better word, every night, which, definitely a very different mentality to the reserve flying stateside, where you're, in hotels and flying missions and staying in different bases and all that. But we were supporting, it's 2017, so still supporting pretty much everything going on out there. The majority of the missions were in and out of Iraq. Some mentioned Jordan. Syria was a hush-hush topic then. As far as anyone knew, we weren't there, but that's when we were starting to spin up all that stuff. Oman, Turkey, going all over and supporting the different efforts in different ways. Whether, you could be just hauling food and stuff, or, there are days we had, I think I sent the picture over to you, just a whole C-17 load of, 2,000 pound bombs, and you're dropping those off at the fighter guys up in Jordan or wherever they were based, and taking care of them there. And so there was a lot of that, mission forward flying, which is awesome stuff. Yeah. And where you actually get to put all these tactics you learned in the schoolhouse. And to back up a little too, I went to a class called Katzmikok, which is, oh man, I'm going to have to remember this now. It's a tactics school. I'm not even going to try to remember now. It's been a few years since I've been there. But went out to a tactics school. So you learn all about the defensive systems on aircraft, how they work, the offensive systems in play right now in different countries, how those work, how we counter them, how they're trying to counter us, and the back and forth. And then in the schoolhouse, you're also learning the tactics we use in the C-17 specifically to, stay as safe as we can, whether that's just stay high as long as possible and then drop like a rock, where we can use the thrust reversers in flight. So we'll stay as high as possible and then throw the thrust reversers out, push the nose over, shove it down, and you see it's just straight dirt in front of the plane. And you dive, and you've got this all planned out. We got books on, they've done all the testing on this is how fast you're going to descend, and this is how many miles you need, and based on this speed and this altitude, we're going to start it here so we can end at this altitude here, and just as quick as possible, as efficiently as possible, be at the airport we want to be, minimize the time we're in the WEZ, the weapons effective zone. So yeah, all those concepts you learned in training and you never use stateside, you finally get to use them and try them out and see how they work. And so a lot of the tactical approaches, tactical arrivals, tactical departures of we're going to descend as fast as we can, or we're going to climb out as fast as we can, as efficiently as we can. And then you're communicating with the different agencies. They're moving you around based on what's going on the ground and air support they're using to support the troops on the ground. So things are constantly changing. A lot of dynamic flying, if you will. And then, so a lot of those missions, and then a handful of sitting Bravo alert, which was 5 days of on call. And man, that'll just never got called on Bravo. So sat on Bravo, you'd sit for 5 days, got to be ready anytime. And just, so some boring little stretches in there where you find ways to kill time. And we'll get to that later, but that's where I found time to work on the side business and, got a lot of exercise in. 24-hour food haul made that a little easier. But it was definitely a venture. Learned a ton about the aircraft, and it's incredible how quick and how much you learn about the aircraft when you're in those situations, because you don't use those tools too often. And we read the book and, we've got all the numbers, and you kind of practice them when you can on the local training missions of, all right, we're going to do a TAC arrival to a short field assault landing, which, when you're in the States and in the airspace, especially the Northeast, you can't be starting at 25,000 feet, 30-some thousand feet, putting the reverses out, diving 20,000 feet, and then adjusting from there. There's too much traffic, and air traffic control will lose their mind and say, absolutely not. You cannot do that. So you practice within the bounds, the boundaries you're in. And so you get to practice this stuff, but not on the stage of, being in a combat zone. And so very different mentality and very different mindset of just taking all that stuff you'd practiced and really getting to apply it and then dig deeper into it and be like, oh, okay, we did this from 30,000 feet and it didn't work as well as I expected. So you learn the little nuances and you learn how to adjust, and you get really good at it doing it fast. And especially when there's the potential for a threat that, a real threat versus we're doing this for training and we know there's nothing going on. Mm-hmm. But great missions. We moved a lot of, other than the weapons, moved a lot of helicopters in and out of Iraq. That was a very common mission of pulling Black Hawks. Usually we take a crew and a helicopter to a deployment and then pull a crew and a helicopter out. Mm-hmm. Handful of, bearded guys in normal clothes, and I don't know where they went or who they were, but a lot of different stuff. Met a lot of people, went a lot of places. You get to definitely see a different side of the flying in the C-17.
Yeah, so because we've got to move on now, but overall, did you enjoy your time on the C-17?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. So much fun. And yeah, just a great plane to fly. I feel lucky, privileged to have been a part of the Air Force, been a part of the squadron, be a part of something bigger than yourself and support your country. And then to do that by being able to fly the C-17 just is what an incredible opportunity. And outside of even just, I'll just go a little farther, but outside of the deployment and those missions, I mean, went to places I could never imagine I'd go to, and, ended up in situations where you had one mission, for example, we were tasked to go out to Germany. We were going to 24 hours off there. And then we were flying an out and back down to some islands off the coast of Africa, West Coast, Cape Verde area, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
And drop some stuff off, fly back to Germany, another day off, and then fly back down again the next day. And then they had us set up to go to one island, fly to another. And it like on our mission paperwork. It was like, it seemed to say we were like setting up like an air show, like a static display on an airport. And we were like, this makes no sense at all. Like nobody knew, nobody told us what was going on. So anyway, we fly down to the island the first time, meet a guy, and he's like, oh, thank you. You're supporting a special ops joint training mission between the U.S. Navy SEALs and Cape Verde Special Ops. And I think there was one other country, African country special ops there. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And he's like, yeah, SEAL teams are out there. They're all training together. And it's a kind of a nation building, friendship building thing. It's like, awesome. So we fly back to Germany, come back the next day, same island. And he's there again. He's like, kind of half explained that, yeah, you're just going to go over there. You're going to park, you'll hang out for a little bit and you'll come back. But long story short, right now the airport's closed. So we're going to wait here for a while. And come to find out, these are small islands off the coast. And there had been a murder the night before on the island we were about to fly to. And being these tiny islands, everyone knows everyone. I mean, it's a lot of family and friends and small group of people. So very uncommon, very difficult, it sounded like, for the country, for the island. And then from what I understand, and granted, this was a long time ago and, heard who knows how many hands down. But from what I understand, the brother of the guy who was murdered was a police officer who was at the airport and out of emotion and anger shot his gun in the air, and just from losing his brother. And so that shut down the airport. And so now we're on the other island waiting to go, but the airport's closed and we can't go over there. So we wait for a while, and he's like, yeah, you're going to go over there, park for a bit. Someone will come out and meet you. You'll be good to go. You can fly back after that. So we get there, and I remember on the way in, they start telling us like, yeah, the U.S. ambassador is on his way out to meet you. We got a couple groups of kids, and you've got the president, their prime minister, and his heads of state are on their way out too. And we're like, I'm sorry, what? Like, we've been up all night and nobody told us about this. We've been sitting over the other airport for hours, and it's like, you're bringing who out here? So we land there. There are news cameras out there. There are people, cell phones, people filming themselves with us taxiing in the background. We're just like, we had no clue what was going on. We've been living in this plane for 3 or 4 days now, minus the quick trips to the hotel and back. Yeah. And so the plane's kind of a mess. Yeah. And they're like, we've got an ambassador and prime minister on the way out. And so we just took everything, stuffed it all in the bunks, closed the curtains up. And this is like everything you see in the movies where, the kids got to clean the room real fast and they throw everything in the closet. Yeah. But if you open that closet door, it's all going to come pouring out on top of you. Yeah. And so you're like, man, I just hope this guy doesn't open that. But we land, and the ambassador comes out. He's like, thank you guys for coming. I don't know entirely why we were doing this, if it was a friendship building thing, nation building. But prime minister, heads of state came out, met the ambassador, met all of them. We were on the news, met groups. They had 2 groups of high school kids. I guess there was an affluent and a poor side. And they brought a group of high school students from each one. And so got to talk to them and meet them. And it's that kind of stuff where got to go to places I'd never be, meet people I'd never thought I would, be part of stuff you'd never imagine. And then, get on the news in another country, meet their president, prime minister, and man, incredible experience, incredible aircraft to fly, and got to, they say, if you want to see the world, join the Air Force, and definitely got to.